Hello malt mates and whisky explorers, I'm Ralphie. Welcome to the Whisky Bothy, and this is review number 1130. Extra content, extra opinion, extra perspective. And what I'm doing is I'm comparing and contrasting two heavily peated whiskies, which are in fact very different to one another. But when you first connect with these whiskies, you're not really going to notice it because your senses haven't been acclimatized to the variety of flavors and sensation complexity that you get within heavily peated Scotch single malt whiskies. These two whiskies, we've got Longrow here, 100 proof, 57.1%, a non-age statement. A young whisky, I put it about 7-8 years old, so heavily phenolic, heavily peated. We know that for a fact because they do their own maltings to their own recipe at the distillery. And here we have a very different one that I've recently reviewed, so it's fresh in the archive if you want to compare the two reviews side by side. This is Laphroaig 10-year-old cask strength, and this is batch number 16. This is bottled at 58.5, so at 57.1, 58.5, not a lot between them when it comes to actual strength. And I can assure you, I wouldn't be doing this sort of comparison with a standard 40% bottling. There's just no point, because any heavily peated whisky is really completely dilute at 40%, even 43%. And of course it will be heavily chill filtered. I've poured 2 glasses. I've added 2 spoons of water, 5 millilitres, 10 millilitres. So it has been reduced. Sure, the producers could have reduced it for me, but no, it's not the way it works. Because when you reduce it yourself in the glass at the point of consumption, the whisky needs about an hour to react and respond and to lose the locked up natural components that's extracted from the kilning process and from the casks for maturation. And the consequence is that when you reduce with water, you get much more intensity and complexity and range of experience than you do with any whisky whatsoever that's been pre-diluted so it's safe for your palate, and it's not going to frighten you, and it's not going to give you hiccups. That's why they bottle many whiskies at 40%. So let's superficially look at the difference between these. This is from Campbeltown, this is from Islay. They're using different peat sources. Islay peat is used in Laphroaig, at least partially, because they have their own malting floors at the distillery. Campbeltown, they have all their malting floors at the distillery, and they're using locally sourced peat, either from the Campbeltown area or imported from further afield, but not from Islay, because they'd have to pay for the ferry and the freight to bring it across. So there you have it. So when you've got 2 different kind of peats from different regional areas, you have the provenance of these peats. Islay peat is salty peat. Why? Because it's a low-lying island that gets a huge amount of rainfall directly from the Atlantic on which it borders. There is salt in the rain, salt in the sea mist, brininess. This is why many peated Islay whiskies have that briny note to them, and that iodine note as well that tends to come through with salt, low-lying peat. Peat from other areas in Scotland can be quite nutty. Lowland peat from just outside of Cumbernauld, just north of Glasgow, can be very nutty and sort of slightly twig fiery type, definitely softer, much more suited for Irish whisky. because it's far less impactful. It's just simply less intense, so it allows the complexity of a triple distilled whisky in Ireland show itself more successfully. So we're getting beyond superficials here. When we start to get into forensics, we can discover a number of factors that separate these two whiskies. The two of them simply have different DNA. And even within the whisky scene, there's relatively few whisky fans who focus exclusively on heavily peated whiskies. Such is the diversity of range of available whiskies that people like to play around a little bit with different flavours, different sensations, and the thing about heavily peated whisky is it tends to numb the palate quite quickly. Such is the phenolic intensity, which is basically produced from the combustion of the vegetal matter, which is peat. I'm sure if we collected peat, either of these distilleries, if they collected peat from the Atlas Mountains in North Africa, and there's certainly plenty of it, 11% roughly of the world's landmass are peat bogs. 11%. There's a lot of peat out there. What do you need? Very low-lying, acidic conditions where you have cool temperatures and you have sphagnum moss, small ground shrubs like myrtle, for example, and you have a lot of water retention. So in other words, any shallow lake which can basically be filled up with sediment over the years will eventually become a peat bog, so long as it's not salty. Nosing the two of these whiskies side by side, you immediately spot not a marginal difference but a big difference. One of the mistakes even some experienced whisky fans make is that they think that all peat has the same impact. It doesn't. It's not just where the peat came from, it's the shape of the stills. How much of the peat smoke has gone into the barley during kilning. Now that will vary depending on whether it is large-scale commercial barley, where the barley grain has a thin husk because it's genetically modified that way, or whether it be indigenous local barley, local grown in colder climates, where the actual barley grain has a physically thicker husk to protect the kernel inside of it. This is a factor because during the kilning process, the husk itself, although it doesn't contribute flavour to the whisky normally, when you've got a peated whisky, the husk will more or less have more than half of the actual phenolic component that goes into the peating. And you don't hear so much about that. Another aspect of forensics is how the whisky's prepared. And again, we need a little bit of experience and knowledge this to see past the superficialities with which the distilleries tend to treat us, because they're averaging things out for their average customer. And you will, if you're a real whisky geek and a real whisky fan, you will notice when you visit distilleries that it depends who you're getting the tour from, but employees can understandably get quite nervous when it quickly transpires, particularly after the visitor's had maybe a couple of whiskies, that the visitor, being a anorak about whisky, knows more than the tour guide. Not unusual these days, particularly when you're doing the real deep dive, the history of the distillery, and you have, most importantly, a long-term familiarity with certain specific brands. I have that with Laphroaig. Laphroaig is, for me personally, I prefer it to Longrow. Now here's the rub. This is filtered, heavily filtered. This is non-chill filtered. It's barrier filtered. Usually I would prefer simpler, less filtered whiskey, which is one reason why it seems a little bit confusing. Hey, Ralphie, you know, this has gone through a chill filtration machine with the chill switched off. And we know that because it's owned by a corporation. And they always do that all the time. Always. Irrespective of what the customers want. Because the customers who don't know about whiskey are not important to the big corporations. And it's a fact. Small distilleries, particularly when they've got the provenance of Springbank, they do not have a chill filtration in their bottling plant, and they bottle their whiskey at the distillery. The Longrow, Hazelburn, all bottled at the distillery using Campbelltown water, soft water from the local area. This is one reason why, an important reason why Springbank has the reputation it does. Because of the clarified delivery of an easy to relate to delivery of its authenticity. If this company owned this brand, this would undoubtedly be a superior product very quickly. Imagine Laphroaig local barley. Imagine it. Local barley Laphroaig. No chance. You never see it. They'll never do it. It's a big corporation. They're too big to care. And that's the fact of it. That's an opinion, by the way. It's just an opinion. I know these are highly volatile times for offering up an opinion, but hey, you know, I haven't been gagged yet, and I'll never be gagged with my appreciation of Laphroaig, but it's become much more specific. Now it's only cask strength 10-year-old. Only. See your Laphroaig Select, Laphroaig Oak, Laphroaig special finishes. I am frightened to buy them because I know they would be hugely disappointing because they are an absolute pathetic little shadow of what this distillery is capable of being, and that is exclusively down to the ownership of Beam Suntory brands, who do what the big fashion houses like Louis Vuitton and Gucci do to fashion. They trash it, sooner or later. But they'll always have one version, just at least one version, just whether it be Pret-a-Marché, whatever. The fashion houses will always have something which retains its quality just to hang on to its reputation. Same with Laphroaig. At least they get one bottling. And I'm really concerned. I don't know how much longer this is going to last. But what I do know is that independent bottlers are getting access to Laphroaig now and Bowmore. And I have every confidence that they will treat the product with far, far more respect and dignity than the owners do. Because this is about the only official bottling I can even relate to Laphroaig anymore. And this is one reason why I've got quite a bit of Laphroaig in my stash. And I'll be pulling out shortly, when I do a stash series coming up shortly, I'll be pulling out a bottle of Laphroaig that I bought then to review later, and this is a good reason to open it, review it, and tell you all about it. I've done a lot of talking. I always do. It's this channel. Tasting these whiskies side by side. Heavily peated, but medium peat delivery because of the heavy influence of fresh cask, short-term maturation. The Laphroaig, much more dynamic, much more signature. I'd only wish Springbank owned Laphroaig. But see if they did, when we could never buy it, the demand would be so high. The Laphroaig signature, that elemental, herbaceous, resinous, super resinous nature. The question you're asking, hey Ralphie, can we do this too? Malt mates, see, if you're not actually mixing your whiskies, you're avoiding making some wonderful discoveries. So, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that. You can measure out if you want, but see, initially, there's no need. Just keep it light-hearted and casual. I've created a combination. This is now a blended malt of Longrow and Laphroaig. How often do you hear about this getting mentioned on the internet? Correct. Never. We've bought these bottles with our money. We've paid the taxes. We've paid tax to get the money, tax to spend the money. Tax, 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 tax. We've got to be fussy, discerning, and highly selective about what we spend our money on. These are both excellent single malts. I highly recommend them both. And when they're combined, both together, quite literally you get a third whiskey. It's neither one nor the other. This is no longer Laphroaig, it's no longer Longrow. It's Laphroaig really dialed back, given more fresh cask influence, slightly more subdued. Now we've got this delivered more slowly because of the influence of this, which has made this richer, slightly more oily, slightly more subdued, candy, resin, phenolic peatiness. Does that make sense? One reason people eventually get fed up with Scotch whisky is that they fatigue their palate, and gradually they replace quality with quantity. They think that because they're sipping, that, and it's a small glass, that they're controlling consumption. But what happens is gradually the alcohol takes over and people aren't prepared for it. So you've got to take time out, and then come back again and be prepared to use your imagination a little bit more to refocus and recalibrate the responsibility for educating our palate. The consequence is simple. You'll walk into a supermarket, pick a supermarket, wherever you are, anywhere, particularly the USA and the UK, where the majority of products sold in the supermarkets are crap. And you'll notice the lack of flavour. Even in the fresh fruit and veg, it's the pure lack of flavour, the banality and blandness of corporate food supply. And within that food supply and the heavy processing and all the hidden chemicals, you've got to ask yourself, if you want to live a little bit longer, is it really the case that you should be eating more and more genuine, proper, fresh food and taking the time and making the time to actually source real, seasonal, locally sourced ingredients and prepare a meal? I mean, it's not rocket science. Any kid can prepare a meal for themselves, whether it be beans and toast or scrambled egg. Scrambled egg with a side of what? Potatoes, beans, crispy bacon. When we really connect with whiskey and gain experience, our palates develop a very natural, powerful support to our system. They become more discerning, and they help us to actually separate the sickness-inducing foodstuffs from the foodstuffs that genuinely offer real nutritional value. And I guarantee you, check it out for yourself, but I guarantee you, you will notice before too long, when you eat real food, you will notice that it has, yes, real flavour. Ask an Italian whose mama cooked them food. Simple diet, powerful flavours, and no fear of herbs grown in the garden. The olive oil, the quality of it. Real olive oil has real flavour. We condition our palates with whiskey. It's one of the big plus points. Enough from me now. See you later. Hope you've enjoyed this. Tatty bye.